Here's an experiment for you. Take passionate experts in human resource technology. Invite cross-industry experts from inside and outside HR. Mix in what's happening in people analytics today. Give them the technology to connect. Hit record. Pour their discussions into a beaker. Mix thoroughly. And voila, you get the HR Data Labs podcast, where we explore the impact of data and analytics to your business. We may get passionate and even irreverent, but count on each episode challenging and enhancing your understanding of the way people data can be used to solve real-world problems. Now, here's your host, David Turetsky.
Hello and welcome to the HR Data Labs podcast. I'm your host, David Turetsky. Like always, we try and find you the most fascinating people inside and outside the world of HR to bring you up to speed on what's happening in HR data, analytics, and HR technology. Today, we have with us our best friend and co-host, Dwight Brown. Hey, Dwight, how are you?
Hey, David. I'm good. How you doing?
I'm outstanding.
Good.
And we have with us from ZayZoon, Shubh Sidhu, who is the VP of Growth. Hey, how you doing, Shubh?
Hi, David. I thought you were going to introduce me as your best friend. I got super excited there.
Dude, after the podcast, you will definitely be my best friend. So, Shubh, why don't you give us a little bit of background about ZayZoon and yourself and how you got here today? Talk to us.
Sure. Yeah. So ZayZoon is what's called a early wage, earned wage access provider. So we have a product called Wages on Demand, which allows employees to get access to a part of their pay in advance of payday. So we'll talk, I think, a bit more about what that actually means here. Myself, like you mentioned, I look after growth here at ZayZoon. ZayZoon's a rapidly scaling company. So I'm fortunate to work with a pretty awesome team of folks across sales, marketing, revenue operations, service. I've had a bunch of different jobs in the technology industry. Again, been very, very lucky to be part of some companies that have grown and be around a bunch of great people. So this is, it's been kind of a wild ride here the last few years with everything we've gone through.
Yes, it has.
And, outside of work, I've got, I'm in what my professional podcasting studio, which is the corner of my basement office in my house that I share with my wife and my 3 girls.
There you go.
I like sports. I like to read books, but not about business. And I like to say I'm a practicing optimist. So, but a realist, is that possible? Can you be an optimist and a realist at the same time?
I think a lot of us take on, both sides of our brain a lot of times. So I think you can be.
Sure. All right. Well, yeah, there it is. That's my background.
Awesome. One fun thing that no one knows about you, Shubh.
A couple. I mean, I know you said no one knows. Most people professionally, I would say, don't know this. Like certainly some folks in my personal network or at ZayZoon do. I made a viral YouTube video back before viral meant the same thing it does now.
Mm-hmm.
So a few 100,000 views for a music/sports related videos back in 2009.
Wow.
Yeah, I like to do some fun. I don't get to do as much of that kind of thing, but the few creative projects here and there.
Well, you have a podcast studio, so you could.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I was just about to say, I never got to the point where my creative endeavors got me a neon sign like yours in the background, but that's my next goal, I think.
For those people who realize this is a podcast and you can't see what Shubb's talking about, above my head, there's a neon sign that says HR Data Labs podcast, because I'm a geek and I'm fully bought into the fact that I'm a host of a podcast.
I think they can hear it.
They can.
I think that energy comes through for sure. Yeah.
So we're gonna have to post a picture of that now as well. So we'll do that as part of the podcast. So as Shubh said, today we're going to be talking about earned wage access and how it affects employees and how really cool it is a benefit. Just to talk about the topic before we actually get into the questions, we're living in uncertain times, and there are more people than ever who are living paycheck to paycheck, and you don't have to be an hourly worker to live paycheck to paycheck. A lot of us in the salaried world do as well. And so we're going to talk about what earned wage access is and how it affects employees, but it's been a huge benefit to a lot of people who used to have to get payday loans at ridiculous interest rates. So hopefully I didn't steal too much thunder from you, Shubh.
No, that's good. You can do the pitch from now on. Yeah.
Well, we don't do pitches here on the HR Data Labs podcast. We're not selling
No,
anything.
I meant outside.
It's all thought leadership,
this,
so we're all good. So that brings us to our first question, which is kind of obvious. What actually is earned wage access?
What happens when employees behave badly? Boy, we could do an entire TV show, maybe a Netflix special on that. Well, Ryan and I sat down and recorded episodes for FAMA, and we asked practitioners, give us your most outrageous story. The sales leader that brings cocaine to work, whatever. Just bring us the outrageous, and it is funny. So if you need a laugh, which we all do from time to time, search for workplace misconduct wherever you get your podcast, and you'll find it. And trust me, you will laugh and cry, but you'll definitely laugh. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. I highlighted it a little bit, but maybe I'll start before I talk about it, just like by expanding on what you just said there. So the idea that folks, you get paid, you have money, and then you have money for your necessities and your things, like that's like kind of ingrained into us for a lot of us. The reality is there's a massive chunk of people that those intervening periods between when that paycheck hits their bank account, they don't have money. And I don't mean they don't have money to go on vacation, or they don't have money to buy buy fancy clothes or whatever. What I mean is, like, they're staring down the barrel of, okay, how do I afford to eat today? Or how do I pay for stuff for my kids' school? And so historically, what are the outlets folks have had to solve that problem? Well, in a perfect world, everybody would get paid every day, and they would get paid, for free, and the employer and the business would have enough cash flow in order to do that, right? Well, the business doesn't have the cash flow to pay people every day, right? And as a result, employees end up effectively subsidizing that cash flow, right? You get paid every 2 weeks because that's the way it's always been, and that helps the employer put that money in the bank.
Yeah, but I mean, that's an agreement that employees kind of make with employers to say, I'm going to get paid in arrears. I'm going to do all the work, and then, I get paid for it after I do all the work. And, you're kind of riding on my pay, you're getting kind of a little bit of a float until you make that paycheck happen. Totally.
That you exactly described it correctly. And you described it as in the right way, which is it's an agreement and a commitment that I've made as an employee to say, you know what, I've got you for these next couple of weeks, and then you'll make me whole. But the reality is, personally, your cash flow situation is the same as the business cash flow situation. You have things that are not timed or aligned necessarily with pay. So effectively, the concept of early wage access or earned wage access is trying to bridge that gap. So how do we get employees access to their pay as they work, right, without having to necessarily wait for that 2-week cycle, while at the same time not compromising the employer cash flow shortfall? If you're a restaurant that might have 17 days of cash flow on hand, right? Which is typically on average, you can't pay people necessarily every day, right? So what earned wage access is designed to give the employee that you mentioned the word agreement, which I love. So the balance of power has typically been like, okay, I'm going to take this job, I'm going to float you for a couple of weeks. So now we're sort of shifting that balance a little bit in that, okay, I'm going to be in control of my finances over these next couple of weeks, because what I have to pay for and buy and own does not, align with a 2-week cycle, right? I don't eat every 2 weeks. So, this allows me via an app, via something that's integrated into my employer's payroll system, to get access to a part of my pay in advance of payday. And, that doesn't, so what you apply to, David, the other options that have historically existed are things like payday loans, overdrafting bank accounts, going late, credit cards. This basically is not perfect. It's not a perfect solution, right? The perfect solution, like I mentioned, everybody could get just paid every day for free, right? All the time. But it's a lot better than what's historically been out there for employees to kind of bridge that gap. That was a pretty long-winded answer. I know,
it's exactly the answer you'd expect, because this is definitely an issue. And cash flow, there are people who are really great at being able to manage their money, and then there are people who suck at it. And then there's a lot of people in between, and you don't have to suck or be great to need that kind of an issue, to need access to your wages. in an intervening period. There are some issues that come up, like whether it's my kid gets sick, or I can't cover the doctor's bill and they ask for the money up front, or, you mentioned, paying my mortgage. Well, sometimes mortgage, the timings don't work out exactly the way your paycheck does, even though you should be able to engineer that with your mortgage company, or the rent is due. You've got to be able to make those payments. And if you've done the work, one would argue if you've done the work, you should be able to get access to it. But as you mentioned, that float is really important for the business and for its survival. And so this is kind of a nice happy medium, right? It provides employers with some benefits and provides employees with some benefits. I guess, weighing all of the differences, we're going to get into company perspective versus employee perspective. I guess the one thing I'd ask is, why isn't this kind of a rule? I know there are certain states like California who have rules about people getting access to pay, when it occurs, but those are only in certain situations, right?
Yeah. So I think what we're probably talking a bit about is last check sort of entitlement, checks, right? If you're on the way, if it's your last day at the company, right, you have, basically the requirement to get, effectively cash in hand or check in hand that day, right? Now, so I guess the follow up point, right, to your question is okay, well, why aren't there rules mandating, say, folks have to get paid, when they work? Now, there kind of is in some cases. So when we think about the hospitality industry, for example, and tips, right? You're effectively, a minimum wage requirement is a combination of both base pay and tips. And then you have some entitlement to deliver tips in a timely manner, right? But not necessarily on a daily basis. All kinds of, we go, I think, state by state and probably come up with 40 or 50 different iterations of the rules. So the reality is, I think this is not a thing that you get paid for the day that you work. Back to kind of calling back to what we talked about at the outset, if there are many businesses where that's just honestly not a reality for the business too, from a cash flow perspective, right? So we may sit here and go, well, the employer should pay everybody every day. And that's probably true. But again, their receivables might be tied to something else, right? The way they process cash, their expenses. So, I would suspect probably the biggest reason that this type of thing isn't mandated, that employers have to deliver pay on a daily basis, is for two probably big reasons. One is it would put a lot of companies out of business. And then the second is a lot of the technology doesn't support it as fast as scale has improved from a cloud computing perspective is as much better as these platforms are. Running payroll is still intensive, both labor intensive and technology intensive, and so the ability for a company to do that on a daily basis is just probably not tenable.
Oh right? Yeah, definitely. Gross to net calculations have to rely on being able to have all the right time and being able to go through some audits before you actually make the payment. So yeah, payroll. Immediate payroll is a nice thing to think about for the future, and maybe we'll even talk about that later. But the other question I wanted to ask is the rise of the gig worker. And gig workers, they should be getting paid after the work they do because they're not expecting another paycheck from the company, right?
Totally. So, and actually that speaks to a lot of why we've seen, I think, some sort of accelerated growth in the adoption of early wage access programs over the last couple of years here. So, in particular, in our case, we've been doing this since, 2017, right? And so the first few years, it was a lot of evangelizing, right? You were just evangelizing a bit of what we did at the beginning of this call, which is, hey, here's the scope of the problem. Here's a novel way to potentially address that problem. So it was very much this is what this is. I'm going to explain to you what it is. What we've seen over the last couple of years with the tightening of the labor market and also with the rise of sort of the gig economy is that, two things are happening. One is it's harder to attract labor, right? The second is that the folks who are taking those jobs have the option of have optionality, I suppose, in their work. So back to that, again, balance of power, that whole employee empowerment is, would I take a job at that hotel on Friday, knowing that I won't get paid till next Friday, or will I go, do Lyft shift because I know I'll get paid that night, right? And if I need that money in hand, I think we probably can guess what's going to happen there. So, so the increase in the amount of gig work or the gig work opportunities has also begun to, I think, establish a framework that says I can get paid right away for that type of work. If you can't do that, then I'm going to go do that instead, right?
Absolutely.
Like what you hear so far? Make sure you never miss a show by clicking subscribe. This podcast is made possible by Salary.com. Now, back to the show.
Let's transition to the next question, which is, what should companies expect when they start implementing something like an earned wage access program?
Sure. And, preface this a little bit by, there's probably some criteria around the type of company that we're talking about, whether it's a very large company with expansive HRIS and payroll teams or, all the way down to a much smaller company. And so, we can talk about like some of the different things that folks will be looking for. I think first and foremost, I know I've talked about this several times on this call already, but it's cash flow, right? So like how does a solution that a client or company is looking at offering, how do they offer it without necessarily impacting their cash flow? I.e., if they have to pre-supply a float for an early wage access program, well then what have they ultimately, how have they helped, right, themselves, right, in addition to their employees? So that's one thing. I think then depending on, the scope, scale, size of the company, we're talking about, how much time and energy can they spend to support a program like this, right? So again, very large companies that, very large total rewards teams or benefit teams or compensation teams might have the higher capacity to say, do some more integration work or do some more work that's going to require more overhead from those teams, down to like the SMB type is going to really look for something that's like
turnkey,
right? Can I turn this on in 20 minutes and can it just be available? Because ultimately this isn't a service the employer wants to have to actively manage or, really even participate in, right? They're just trying to provide a conduit by way of like technology so that employees can kind of have a better solution than what they have access to today. I would say those two things. And then like anything, right? As a company, what do you want to do? You never want to offer a benefit that's like a pain for your employees to use that's going to require a bunch of support from your side of things. Like a lot of those, are the same things. And ultimately, is the company that they might be working with at an early wage access standpoint, fundamentally, is that mission of the company to do, better for these employees or not, right? And so, I think those are probably some of the major things that they look for.
I think one of the things that I'd want to make sure of, though, when I'm an employer and I'm going to adopt something like this is, payroll's complicated enough. And keeping time and keeping payroll records and all that other stuff. So this definitely needs to be seamless, but it also needs to be communicated to everybody about the rules of the road. How do you access it? Sure. Who can access it? When can you access it? What is it going to affect? What's the back end of it? Meaning after you get this upfront payment, what's the costs associated with it? And then what does it mean about when you get your next check? Are you going to get the full check or are you going to get a partial piece of it? What are the mechanics of that exactly? Because, when people go and they get payday loans, they know what they're expecting, right? They're going to bring, some form of like their last 3 pay stubs. They're going to, bring identification. They're going to have to sign an agreement saying that they're going to have to pay an interest rate on it. So they kind of understand what they're getting and they go into it eyes open, knowing that they're going to lose something. We have to really do some significant communications work on this to make sure, because it's an HR process, it needs to go smooth and it needs to be communicated fully. So how do all those things get wrapped up? Because that can be quite complex.
Yeah.
Sorry for the long-winded question there, Shubh.
No, not at all. Like, so it's simplicity first and foremost. So like, how do you keep it as simple as possible in terms of both what the solution does and the product does and the messaging? Because one of the things we found as we've gone through this journey is that, we found that people don't even really understand things that I would have thought they fully understood, like what all the line items on their pay stub mean, whether they even get to the portal. Like, I mean, it's like, it's been an education process for us. So we have people who come into our app because it simplifies the information that's on there. It makes a lot more clear to them, right? And so I don't have a perfect silver bullet answer. There's been a lot of iteration, at least in our case, on how you present this in a way that is like very, very easy to understand. You're as upfront and transparent as humanly possible, right? So like when it comes to like fee structure, to your point, David, like, okay, this is what's going to happen. This is when those fees will come back. That has to be like
Right up front.
very apparent, right? And then finally, like this is people's money and pay, right? And like rule one of HR is you don't something with people's pay, right?
You don't mess with people's pay. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, right. So I mean, you have to get it right, and you have to like you have to over support a service like this, right? Like both from our standpoint, like listen, there's brand value for a company like ours to like have positive customer experiences, customer success. But the biggest thing is when we have and are servicing someone who needs that money for a necessity, because this is not a service that is a want based, or like it's not for wants, right? It's for need. So the service aspect, so much of our explanation is great a job as we all think we might do on the, communicating things and communication plans and rollouts and products and HR communication. It's like in the moment when they need to understand something, they have to be like heavily supported, right? Like this is ultimately a solution that should be well supported and well communicated by the partner that you're working with.
So I would imagine there has to be some operational challenges. I mean, in terms of, you mentioned the pay stub. How do you take out insurance premiums, for example? How do you do taxation? How to calculate taxes in a system like that?
Yeah. So again, like the concept of using an early wage access solution or provider is effectively it's like a split deposit or, wage deduction. So you end up kind of designing a way that so you don't impact the way a lot of those things you're talking about. Any of those, those primary deductions come out ahead, like, your core deductions. So you make sure that that's part of a solution. B, from a gross versus net perspective, that addresses a lot of like, the additional taxation, potential challenges, right? You have to sort of operationalize this so there is no impact on the payroll folks and on the payroll system, right? From that standpoint, otherwise, all you've done is introduced, a bunch of administrative overhead.
So, Shubh, let's get to the practical examples of benefits that employees get. Now, there's the obvious one, right? Which is the person feels desperate. They don't know how they're going to feed their kid tonight for dinner. They can't make rent payments and the rent's overdue and they're just scrambling. Their brain is on fire. And that's obvious benefit, right? But, what are other benefits that an employee gets from being able to have access to earned wage access? Or did I just cover it?
Yeah, well, it's funny you say that's an obvious benefit, David, and I don't know that it's obvious to everybody.
Really?
So I think that, so I think a lot of times when we talk about this, people look at the benefit as like they really think of just the mechanical part. Okay, they can get access like to their pay when they need for things that they need. I don't think most people do really actually think about, you use the term the brain is on fire because they're running around. Like, financial stress is outside of like a couple of other things, like right at the top of everybody's list, right? In terms of what impacts you and causes you the most stress. And listen, we're not talking about folks who are dealing with the financial stress of, am I saving enough for my, college fund or my 401k? That's not what we're talking about, right? And so this is like, I think the psychology of the financial stress we're talking about is like you're waiting on a doctor to call you about test results, right? That's the same stress level and same impact on your brain. So, we've heard from employees like close to 90% will say, listen, my stress level is lower knowing I have access to like on-demand pay. And then we'll dig in and like not even all those folks have used it recently. It's really that safety valve aspect, I would say, is actually the biggest benefit. And you're right, that does kind of cover a lot of things, but it's that safety.
It's an insurance policy.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's like that release valve, just knowing you've got that in your back pocket if you need it, that takes an enormous amount of stress off. Then I think you start to look, there are other benefits like from a lot of early pay programs where, there are a lot of them will include, financial literacy and financial wellness, like components that are part of it. So there's obviously some self-learning required there, but that can be provided. So, how do you, we're really solving a reactive problem. Is there anything we can do to help with the proactive problem collectively? Then of course there's other things in terms of, the real ticket or goal for a lot of us financial wellness providers beyond just on-demand pay, how can we then subsequently increase the buying power of these folks, right? Like, I mean, we can't give them, we can't have them earn more or make more, but how do we make their money go further if we can? And so that's where I think you'll start to see some of what's hopefully going to evolve here, as we go through things, on this, for this particular employee benefit.
One of the things I was contemplating as you were talking is that it's getting the employee to a place where they can make that payment, make that rent check, or whatever it is, that emergency. And you're right, financial literacy, first of all, is just terrible these days in the United States, globally, of course, but definitely terrible in the United States. And I'm wondering whether there's examples that we could talk about from a benefits perspective where the employee then has a way of discussing this with their family to be able to show their kids, and obviously sometimes you don't want to show this to your kids, but to be able to show that, we made it, we're okay, and here's how we're going to change for next time, or here's how we're going to do something different for next time. So that might be part of financial literacy, right? Or is that obviously on a case-by-case basis, we have to deal with this ourselves, and it's very personal and sometimes very depressing issue. But I guess that's part of financial literacy, isn't it? Being able to deal with this the next time and the next time, because we don't want this to be an ongoing thing where we use this every pay period, right?
Yeah. I mean, the goal is like, I mean, I think there's like, kind of your point about, okay, how do you make it so that it's, it's helping in the long term versus not just helping in the moment. Right. And I think there's one very clear spot where, because this isn't a credit product, like some of the other things, it doesn't start to roll over and increase the amounts that you start to owe, right? Which is what happens like with a lot of the alternatives, right, which puts you further and further behind. So like from an actual like real material, like financial cash flow benefit, like that's probably the primary positive long-term benefit. I think improving the wellness or literacy aspect, I think, honestly, this is something we're all still working our way through. And I think that one of the things that I've really found, and one of the reasons we're, a lot of us are doing this, is like most like employee financial wellness programs, like what we qualify as wellness programs, are designed for people who have money, right? Not for people who don't have money, right? Like they're really around, like I said earlier, like saving for a better retirement. So I think that what we all have to kind of unlock, to your point, is like how else is this going to benefit folks? So like we know from the data that we talk to our folks about, like how do you build credit when you have no money? Yeah. How do you build credit? Right. And in America, like your credit score is everything, right? And this isn't a matter of folks not understanding that. Like all of our customers know their credit score, right? They know it. And so they're well aware of their financial position, but like what are the tools and stuff in place that we can start to provide to help pull them out of it? So to your point, David, like the conversations they're having with family and friends or their kids is like, okay, here's how we can build towards like a more positive like financial position, right?
And Shubh, that's exactly where I was going with it, which is that you have a picture of their financial health from the employer perspective. You know how much they get paid, you know how much their deductions are, and with a little bit of input from the employee, you can find out what's the rent payment, what are some of their big bills like electric and gas and insurance and all this other stuff. And then you can help them see that in this short term, we're going to close the gap this way. But in the longer term, here are the things we see typically by using data and the analytics we have across the hundreds of people who utilize our service. This is how you might be able to, add a little bit to your savings every day, or be able to take a piece of your paycheck, a little piece, put it aside, and then be able to grow something so you don't have to use us again. No offense to you. Again, this isn't a commercial for ZayZoon, but we want people not to have to use these earned wage access programs as much as they can, right?
Totally. Like we always talked about, like if we ultimately in the long term deliver on our mission, people are going to need us less and less, right? Like that's kind of the
very
goal,
altruistic.
Right? I mean,
probably never going to happen, but altruistic.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I mean, we're trying to build a company, but like none of us, at least, I mean, I can't speak for every early wage access provider, obviously, but I can speak to in our case, like it's the primary motivator, right? Is that like that employee flexibility, employee financial wellness benefit, everything we think about is through that lens, right? Like, and so like the longer term improvement is like, that's the part, I think that's the next evolution of this thing, to your point, right? It's like, okay, we got a saying out here where I live up in Alberta, Canada, which first you get the cow out of the ditch and then you figure out, how you keep it out the next time. Right. And so, we're still very much in the getting the cow out of the ditch part. I don't actually understand what that means. I grew up in the city, but the point is, I think that we're absolutely entering this phase of like, how do we get these folks empowered so they can not need on-demand pay all the time, right? For sure. B, how do we start to like layer in other opportunities for them to like I said, to build credit, I think is a big one. How do we, when I talked about increasing their buying power, that's a big one, right? Like, how do we get them more money at places, right? But also you talked about things like, like here's the bills that come out, here are the other things that come out. Well, if we can then work with these folks to help, like in some of those third-party providers to go, hey, listen, like there's a higher chance of you getting a good customer, right? Because of this person like improving their financial position. Now, instead of like, here's your cell phone group plan, or here's your whatever, right? Sure. Like, how do we save the money on those necessities? So I think that's definitely the next evolution is we want to grow this into like a longer term improvement in folks' financial position, right?
There's a lot of work to do there. I'm not being facetious. There just is.
No, there is. And I'm like, again, I come from a technology background, and I think it's always like, I think it's a bit naive for any, myself included, to go, hey, here's the information on how you build a better budget. Go read this, and you're automatically going to know how to build a better budget, right? And so that's definitely part of it, but it's got to be actionable, right? So like the tactical element that's actionable, that I can do a thing and like see the result and see the impact. And so that's where I think we see the opportunities. Like nobody learns how to play a musical instrument by just watching somebody play a musical instrument and be like,
you have to do
it. Okay, next time I'll be able to play it, right? Like, you got to build that skill set all up, right?
And that's why I was talking about using analytics to show people what good scenarios are that other people employ based on the data that you guys have, in order to be able to get their timing right on paying bills the right way, or being able to choose the right bill to pay at what time. And we could actually create another complete podcast on being able to do financial wellness analytics. Unfortunately, we don't have time today, but that's a good one to maybe pick up another time.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're 100% spot on. It's like, we're starting to get information around like, oh, here's, I think one of the most jarring things for me, even still after doing this, was, generally, I think like 13% of people use payday loans, for example, right? Our customer base said before this 40%, right? Like, I mean, like just that number alone is staggering, right? Like, so
we'll wait until we get into a recession too. And, people start
with
really
inflation and everything else happening, 40+% are paying more than $50 in just like straight up
interest
fees, like late fees, like not even like outside of the payday loan space, just like late fees, credit card fees, like, the rate we've trained folks to say, pay your minimum payment on your credit card, right? Because it's beneficial, obviously for certain companies, but that's not good practice. It's not good wellness. So there's tactical things we can do to help, but then there's like you said, it's a big thing, but there's these institutional and framework items that like, how do we help in the long term? And I think that's where we absolutely have to figure this out and go next.
And again, we can have a complete podcast just on that subject of using analytics to solve financial wellness. Well, Shubh, thank you very much. It's been fascinating talking about earned wage access. We really appreciate you being here. I think we've learned about what it is, why there are some things that companies need to be careful of and to kind of budget for. And I think we've seen what the benefits are clearly for employees to be able to have access to this. So thank you so much. Anything else you want to add from that summary?
No, guys, I just want to say, David, Dwight, thanks very much for having me on. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. And happy to come back anytime.
Cool. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Shubh. Thank you, Dwight.
Thank you, David.
And thank you guys for listening. Take care and stay safe.
That was the HR Data Labs podcast. If you liked the episode, please subscribe. And if you know anyone that might like to hear it, please send it their way. Thank you for joining us this week, and stay tuned for our next episode. Stay safe.